Indeed. Oh. I have so much work to do. Oh, it's bad. All right. Oh man, I'm in a I am in a weird mood. I don't know why. I'm just like, why? Why is today not tomorrow? And why is tomorrow not the day after tomorrow? So it can be reading week already. Okay. It is. I don't know what it's been about this semester. It's usually I'm fine and I'm like raring to go, but I really feel like this one's ground me down a little bit. Okay. So I don't know why. I feel like I have to erase that. It looks too smart. I feel dumb with it on the board. So, obviously, next week is reading week, so don't come. Yay! No class. No intro to methods. Huzzah, we're free. I will have, beginning of next week for sure, I will have your major labs back. It's my number one priority, except that it keeps getting pushed down the list by more urgent things. So haven't quite gotten as much time to work on it. I think I have like 10 of them left, and then I'll upload them all. So I apologize it's taken so long. I feel bad about it. And yet, because the department decided to literally just give me half a TA in terms of time, I've had to do all the marking for this class and all my other classes. So I'm just behind. But I will get caught up during reading week, probably, maybe, I hope. Maybe not. But we'll see. This class for sure. I guess the mini lab technically due on Sunday. Do you want me to just make it due like the Sunday after reading week? Yes? Prayerful. Okay. You know what? So that I don't forget, and since you asked so nicely, I will just do it now. Democracy. Oh, unfortunately, not enough people came to class, and we don't have quorum. So, no, I'm kidding. Let me go I'll do a quick change on that right away. Because I figure, yeah, you probably don't want to do it in the next couple of days and just take that time. And then I'll just frantically mark it on the Monday before the next week. Sigh. Lasai. Okay. Then, oh. Seriously? Oh, yeah. Well, now that so is here, we have quorum, so I can make that change. Yay! No. I'm kidding. I'm just moving the due date for the next mini lab back another week, so it's not due till the Sunday of the end of reading week. That wouldn't have happened if you hadn't shown up today. No, I'm kidding. I'm being silly.
Well, only today, because I forgot my rock, so I think I might in this class.
Okay. Oh wow, 11 people have already submitted it. Aren't they keeners? All right, what was I saying? Okay. The 19th. C'est la vie. Well, I mean, they get 10 out of 10, one way or the other, right? So they did it, so they get the marks. It's all good. Nothing wrong with being keen. Okay. What am I doing? All right. What am I doing with my life? This is what I'm doing. Trying to find presenter view on this laptop. For some reason, I decided, why not bring my other laptop, but it's not set up the way I like. So, good times. All right. So, any questions before I jump in? Like anything you want to ask about interviews or focus groups or interviewee focus groups? Okay. Well, I know are we all dead? We're all dead. Okay. Let's talk about one of the other methods that sort of commonly used on the qualitative side, which is content analysis, right? Okay. I was about to start talking. Let's go to the slides. Okay. So what is content analysis, right? It's basically the examination and coding of documents, texts, or media outputs, right? So you have something written down, you have something, you have something that is, I guess, shown, written down, a movie, a newspaper article, a book, a diary, something that's written that you can then take and analyze, right? Essentially. Now, typically when we're doing content analysis, we talk about, the text. So like, what does the text? The text is just about anything, right? The text can be pictures. The text can be movies. They can be home videos. They can be the diary I stole out from under my sister's mattress. I could do content analysis of that, right? All of these things could be a text that you can analyze in content analysis, right? Visual, audio, virtual content, right? Anything can be done with content analysis. Okay. So I guess who wrote it, or who is reporting? These are questions you can ask. What gets written, what gets reported, like what was actually there, where was it written or reported, what issues, like what kind of things people were talking about, when was it done, and most importantly, I don't know if that's most importantly, but also important, what ends up being left out, right? So, this can be almost anything, and the nice thing about content analysis is that it is very easy. Well, it's not very easy, but it's very easy in the sense of it's really at a great remove, right? You're not interacting typically with human subjects. So one of the big advantages of it is no ethics, right? If you're using content analysis, you don't have to get ethics approval for your project because you're not interacting with a human subject, right? You're typically going to be getting something. I guess if you were taking someone's diary, then you would have to, but that's a fictional scenario that we won't entertain. But typically, right, if you're looking at newspaper articles, books, you want to do an analysis of Sigmund Freud's diaries, right, that were left behind or something like that. That's all publicly available stuff. So it doesn't need to go through ethics. It can be quantitative or qualitative. I think I talked about quantitative content analysis. It is, how shall we say, super boring. Sorry, I shouldn't say that, but I did. It is pretty dull stuff, right? You're counting words, you're counting, phrases being used, how many times certain things were mentioned in articles, and that kind of thing. That's a raised hand? Okay.
So basically any public information you don't need to do like ethics for.
Yes. With the qualification of potentially if you were in like a public chat room, like an internet chat, you might need ethics. Maybe. It depends on who you talk to.
So like reading, like analyzing like an article or like a movie,
you don't know because it's like there's no you're not involving a human person, right? You're just analyzing the product of a human person, but you don't need to like worry that you're going to cause some kind of harm, right? Yeah, Evan.
Like you're doing something controversial, like you're analyzing like documents published by ICE and stuff like that, like just to be saying like, hey, am I like going to be feeding into other sin or like obviously you don't have to be supportive, but like would there have to be? It seems like you said like there'd be like the diary, that makes sense.
Yeah, so if you had somehow acquired someone's diary that wasn't in the public domain, then yeah. But what's that?
What if we're dead?
Yeah, if they're dead, obviously you don't need to. Well,
Gotta respect the dead.
do you though?
I don't know.
I don't.
Morality thing, really.
I don't think you, from an academic perspective, I don't think you do.
I think it's morality you're doing something.
Well, hey, I mean, yeah. I mean, there's a difference between being nice and being ethical, I think. Um,
Makes sense.
but yeah, I think if they're dead and it's somehow like, like I've even seen people like analyzing, documents like personal journals and diaries that were like, kept in like a personal archive, right? Someone kept, grandma's journal or journals, like maybe 20, 30 years of journals. And there's no real ethical requirement, right? As long as you acquired it in a way that is ethical. So like you didn't break into someone's house and steal grandma's journal collection, right? If it was handed over to you, or it was in an archive, there's really no reason you would have to worry about ethics because, she did, right? In terms of the ISIS question, that's a really interesting one. It wouldn't go towards like an ethics board in terms of review, right? Because again, ethics review boards at the university level are really only interested in human subjects. Like, are you ethically treating your human subjects? Where you would probably run into, maybe some questions would be if you go publish something, right? You'd get kind of peer review that might throw up some questions, maybe. Although peer reviewers are not always the most ethical people in and of themselves. But I can't see a scenario where they'd be like, you'd have to go to ethics because if that stuff is publicly available, right, you can analyze it without worrying about the harm caused to the people who created it, right? Whether you spout horrible ideas is a different question.
Is an ethics board kind of like an HR department in the sense that they're just trying to protect the university, or is it like they actually believe in this like greater idea of ethics and they want to maintain that, or is it just like, just don't want the university to get sued? Is it just kind of defensive for the institution?
I don't know that they would love that characterization of the ethics board as an HR department.
I just feel like their main interest is like HR presents themselves as like caring about the employee, but really they're there to make sure that the company doesn't get sued.
Right. So I would say, yes, it is there definitely to protect the university and other research kind of institutions from the possible fallout of unethical research. I mean, hopefully it's also there to protect, the people that research is being done on. And hopefully those two go hand in hand, right? More so than an HR department, which I think you're right, is like, we need to protect the company by making sure that our employees act in a certain way. Where here it's like, yeah, we need to protect the university and people by making sure that, researchers don't, for the sake of science or whatever, transcend boundaries that they shouldn't, because there's always that temptation, right? But yeah, I mean, that's not maybe a terrible metaphor. Just don't put that in your ethics application, or they might be like, dear glorified HR department. And it's not, I guess the other thing is ethics department or ethics boards aren't specialized staff, right? So like an HR department is a specialized staff. They are researchers that are volunteering time on the ethics board to kind of watch the research of other people and make sure it's done in an ethical way. But does that make sense? Okay. How did we get on content analysis to like deep questions on ethics? I don't know. But it's good questions. And yeah, you don't need ethics, which is kind of fun. I always think qualitative content analysis is way more interesting because it's way more freewheeling and open. Like it's a very, very open kind of way of doing research, right? And it is you interacting with any kind of text that you can find that you think is relevant and analyzing it based on, rubrics and metrics that are yours and yours alone. I mean, often you might have to, negotiate with like a supervisor, or obviously, right, sometimes you'll get kind of comments back when you go to publish a journal article on methodology. But, mostly it's a pretty open kind of thing. And there's not a lot of structure or rigor to it in some senses. Okay. Flickery screen makes me scared. I don't know why, but this laptop, I think, clearly projects a bigger image than my other one, which is weird. Good to know. I debate whether I want to show you this video. because I put it in there when I taught this class online. But it's on. All right, well, let's play it. It's on content analysis. It's kind of fun, and if it gets, it's a little on the long side, but if it gets too long, we can just cut it off, and we'll kind of go from there. I promise.
Welcome to another journey with Chris, where we will obtain new levels of knowledge and
Except, of course, it's
awesomeness.
playing on my laptop
Hello,
speaker,
scholars. Today,
which is really going to help. Hang on. Start menu. And what am I playing on? Oh. I don't know what that's going to do. Let's try.
we're going to journey through unobtrusive.
Well, now we can't hear it at all. Oodalolly. This might not be worth it in the end. I know there's more cables. Where are they? All right, here's one. And then there should be an audio cable that's just stuck somewhere over here, trapped. Oh, I see what happened. People, nice people. They plugged it in on both sides. Isn't that nice? I'll try one more thing, and then we'll skip it because I can't make it work.
Journey, we're going to cover content analysis.
It does not work.
The process of conducting a content analysis.
You can watch it on your own.
And the straight.
I hate it when that happens. I don't know what's going on. Probably some setting. Okay. Let's just move on. Okay, so documents. What can be, something that you can analyze? Basically, a document can be any source of data that can be read, right? So anything, whether that's, books, letters, diaries, autobiographies, websites, even visual media like photograph, right? We use it in the very kind of semiotics kind of way of thinking of, you can read just about anything, right? You can read a photograph. If not produced for the purposes of social research, they're a really unobtrusive method. So one of the big advantages with content analysis, right, if you're wanting to analyze something, is at the end of the day, right, you never have to worry about reactivity, right? Because you're not introducing yourself, as a research subject into a real environment. You're not talking to people. So let's say you're looking at letters, right? And we see this kind of research done all the time, especially in history, right? If you're looking at letters, you're looking at sort of people's unfiltered kind of communications with other people, right? Same thing with diaries or journals, right? You're looking at someone's thoughts. Basically, they were for themselves, probably, or in letters for other people, without ever sort of the thought that they would maybe be seen by other people or studied. So we can think that they're pretty open and probably pretty, I don't know how to say this, unfiltered, open, and they're real thoughts, right? Because they weren't probably worried about people coming around and studying them later. Unless you're, there are some instances where people clearly thought they were going to be studied later, like Freud and people like Vladimir Nabokov, the Russian author. But mostly people, when they wrote letters and stuff, they weren't worried about that. I can just imagine I just had a horrifying thought of someone in the future, like going through my email archive and like looking through all the stupid emails that I have to answer in a day. And like as some kind of, text-based ethnography of an academic from the 2020s. And I'm like, boy, that would be a boring task. So anything that you can read is kind of a document. So, what are the criteria for assessing the quality of? Hi.
Sorry, just go
there are things to be studied in the future, then like, should you study them if you're like writing your personal thoughts or you're like in like write them because you're like no one's ever gonna see this. And just have it
studied, but you're dead, so why do you care? I guess, I mean, for historians, right, things like journals, letters, the thoughts of people at the time, well, yeah, people may have not thought they were ever going to be studied, right? As a historian, it becomes an invaluable tool for really understanding how people thought in a particular era, right? For getting inside the mind of people, say in the Victorian era, if you can find the journals or the letters of people who lived in that era, you get a much deeper sense of who they were, what they thought, how they acted than you could by just like looking at kind of surface history, right? And so maybe they didn't want it, but then they shouldn't have written it down. I guess, we're not so much concerned with the feelings of the dead because they can't tell us. So it doesn't hurt anybody really. And yeah, you might be revealing people's thoughts from the past, but there's not really any harm being done to a living person, right? You have to have somehow acquired those documents. So somehow they've been passed to you through hopefully some kind of legitimate means, right? Hopefully you haven't been like grave robbing or something like that. Only the British do that. That's okay. That's how the British fill their museums, robbing the graves of other cultures. You laugh because you know it's true. Does that answer your question? Like, I understand where the impulse is, but there's so much to be learned from looking at documents from the past that it probably outweighs. And was it like, I mean, in the case of like Freud, he explicitly didn't want his journals looked at, so he burned them. That jerk. Yeah, can you imagine what was in Freud's journals?
From what he wrote publicly, I don't know.
I'm really curious. He did burn all of his journals because he was worried that people would study them in the future and didn't want that, right? Yeah, so, and Nabokov, the Russian author, he's famous for writing Lolita, basically the novel about a college professor who falls in love with a 10-year-old girl and then has an affair with her. Well, he's married to her mother, who he then kills, so he can run away with Lolita. And what's that? Murdered me like you murdered my mother, yes. Very disturbing novel. He did not want his stuff read, but his son kept it and sold it later. So there you go. Now his son is obviously evil, but the researcher who legitimately acquired it, who knows? What was I saying? This is so me before reading week. I need like a week to recover my brain. Is it ethical? I think so. I think especially like in cases where people didn't want them read, maybe a little bit less so, but most of the time, right, when you recover like a stack of letters written by Linda the school teacher, in the town of Bonnyville between 1900 and 1925, that's probably an invaluable kind of source. And maybe she didn't expect them to be read, but unless she actually said, please destroy my letters after I die, there's probably nothing wrong with it, right? And for historians, it's such valuable information because you can't, until we build that time machine, really get into the heads of people unless you have kind of documents or things that they produced, right? Or a lot of times what's kind of publicly available might just be elite perspectives, right? Because, you're going to get novels, you're going to get official things, histories and such created by the social elites. But if you want to know how things were for the common people, you kind of need their voice. And sometimes it's hard to get that voice unless you have kind of primary sources that they created. So I think for really understanding how it was for normal everyday people, that kind of stuff is invaluable. Like we've learned so much from a bunch of old letters that someone's put in a steamer trunk and ended up in someone's attic for 45 years. And then, we discover it and it's like, oh my God, Aunt Linda or Great Aunt Linda's letters from London in 1740, right? What an interesting source of information. But I understand you feel like you're violating someone, but they're dead. Don't worry about it. It's fine. They don't care. Hopefully. Okay, does that answer? I unsatisfactorily answer your question. I know you're not. I can tell you're not happy with the answer, but I'm not here to make you happy. That's all good. All right. So, criteria or Scott's criteria for assessing the quality of documents. These are pretty straightforward, right? So, authenticity. Are they genuine or of unquestionable origin, right? So are they actually what we claim that they are? Right? And can we authenticate where they came from, what time they were written, whom they were written by, in such a way as to know for sure that they aren't a fabrication? And I mean, this is an important one because people will 100% fabricate historical documents to prove a point. So, all right, I'll tell you a story because this is a fun one. I have a copy of it in my office. I should have brought it. There's a very famous book called, what is it? Holy Grail, Holy Blood. It's about what is it? The Holy Grail, right? And the idea that Mary Magdalene and Jesus had a child, and that child went on to be like the King of France, all sorts of crazy stuff like that. The guy who ultimately is the source of the myth that's expounded in this book, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he basically created a bunch of fake historical documents, right? He wanted to prove this idea that, there is this, I can't remember how he puts it, but basically like the lineage of the kings and queens of the royal families in Europe were all descendants of Jesus Christ. And that there was going to be a great emperor that would come and rule all of Europe. So he actually created all these false documents and went around France, like he was a historian, so he went around France and he sort of seeded them in the archives, right? So he would go and look at something and then he would leave these fake documents behind. And then he went about and then discovered them all, right? It's funny. He went and left them behind, and then a few years later, he came back and discovered the documents that he himself had planted. Pierre Plantard was his name. And so then he wrote his book, his treatise on the fact that it was this secret military order called the Priory of Sion that had been charged with guarding the story of Mary Magdalene and her children and their descendants and all this stuff. And so, I mean, what did people do is they got these documents and they then checked them for, whether they were genuine, right? So they did things like carbon dating them to make sure they were kind of in the right range in terms of age. And then, they looked at things like the ink, the grammar, and all of these sorts of things and discovered that they were, in fact, an elaborate fraud that Plantard had created so that he could write his account, right? So, just in case you think, well, why would anyone ever plant evidence? People do this not all the time, but it has been known to happen because sometimes you want to prove something, your theory, so bad, or maybe you want to be part of history, right? And so you create a history that's sort of interesting and novel, and you plant evidence, right? So we have to check that things are genuine, that people haven't made them up, right? Especially in the era of conspiracy theories, we really have to make sure that things are genuine and of unquestionable origin to say that they are, quality documents. Credibility, free from error or distortion, factually accurate. This, of course, is going to depend on what kind of document you're looking at, right? But if you're looking at, say, something that you're going to represent as historical, right? And this is, a historical document that outlines, the history of, the Rus or some peoples, right? You want to make sure that, there are no errors, distortions, or factual inaccuracies, right? Like who wrote it? Why did they write it? Are they writing it for a particular audience, for a particular purpose, right? If someone's, say, writing the mythology of the Russian or German people, right, it might be an interesting historical document for understanding something like what Russian people think about themselves, right? There's a text in Russian literature called the Primary Chronicle, and it ostensibly tells the story of the origin of the Russian people, right? And the Russians were according to this myth, were founded by Vikings who came into Russia and what was it? I can't remember the name of the particular Viking. Anyway, and that's where the Rus, the Russian people come from, is these Vikings who came over and conquered this land. Now, I mean, that's an interesting sort of foundational myth. It's definitely not historical, right? We have absolutely no evidence that the Vikings are the founders of Russia. But it is definitely something like you would say, what's the credibility of the account it's telling? Are there distortions, right? Is it a myth? Is it actual history? Is it factually accurate? Or is it a different type of text, in which case it needs to be analyzed somewhat differently? Okay, does that make sense? Okay, representativeness. Ouch. Typical of what it is supposed to represent, right? So how, like, if you're looking at, particular types of historical document, how similar are they to other texts that are like that? And, how representative is something of an era that it would have come out of? And this is why you might not always want to take the accounts of, say, the nobility as necessarily representative of a particular era, right? Because the nobility would have been one class, but then there's a whole class of peasantry and clerics and all sorts of other castes. Like if you were talking about today, right, would you want to take, I don't know, like if you were wanting to say, look at a representation of life in 2023, should you go and look at Kim Kardashian's Instagram page as representative of, the 2020s? As, this is how people lived in the 2020s. Apparently they were all interested in hawking, herbal supplements and other things. I've never looked at Kim Kardashian's page. I just assume that's what she does. And I've heard it's like lip gloss that makes your lips lippier or something. I don't know. This is my experience of Instagram, watching my wife on Instagram. She's like, "Oh, this is an interesting product." I'm like, "That's just an influencer trying to sell you garbage. Please stop." Or would it be better to say, go through a whole bunch of Instagram feeds of normal people to get a more typical look at what life is like, say, in the 2020s, right? How representative is what you're looking of the kind of time period or the circumstance that you're talking about? Meaning, is it clear and comprehensible, right? Text can sometimes be a bit of a jumbled mess. Is it complete, right? Because sometimes, we dig up fragments of things. And are they complete? Are they understandable? Do they make sense, right? How well can we decode them at the end of the day? And sometimes, with historical documents, it can be that we've lost the ability to interpret them because our reading of things has changed so much. Okay, does that all make sense? Okay. Checking the time. Does my phone stick to this? Oh, it does too. Cool. I can use it as a clock. All right. It has a magnet in it. I know you're like, is it going to fall? No, it's all good. Magic. Okay. I love whiteboards. All right. So personal documents, right? And this is sort of what Mia is concerned about, that we're going to violate people by looking at especially diaries and letters. But like I said, diaries and letters are super invaluable because they're so unfiltered, right? They're so what people were expressing to other people. Like I think of, this was a few years ago, they did a whole bunch of things like Canada, A People's History, where they took, this was a CBC project, where they took diaries and letters from people who would have been, say, in kind of colonial Canada, and sort of told the story of Canada through those diaries and letters that people were writing, that had been dug out of archives, and that basically were a representation of things as they were, right? Don't steal your sister's diary from under her pillow and then, write your dissertation about it, though that would be fun. But, things from the past definitely are fair game, especially if you've acquired them legitimately. Autobiographies, obviously, when people have written the stories of their own lives, and put them out in some kind of public consumption, that obviously is also quite legitimate. And then visual objects. So this would be things like photographs, right? Photographs, lithographs, Increasingly now, because we've been for probably since like the 1980s in the age where everybody could produce their own videos. Any kind of home videos that people produce, and I guess now increasingly anything that what you would find on YouTube could all be things that you could analyze as, video games, even as text that would all be kind of documents. I guess video games aren't personal documents. But let's say, like, even if you took someone's Twitch playthrough of, I don't know, some game, or all those obnoxious videos that people post of themselves playing Minecraft that for some reason my kids like, and I can't figure it out. Like, here is Minecraft. Play it. Why are you watching that person play? I don't understand. I'm too old. My kids are like, no, but it's fun. I'm like, but why? But you could use, someone's playthrough of Minecraft or Grand Theft Auto 6 as a visual text that you could analyze, right? Especially if it's out in the public domain. Why you would want to do that, I don't know. Oh, yeah. Anyway, sorry. Like, that's not a personal document, but YouTube comments is one that you can use too. But it's horrifying. Right. Applying Scott's criteria. Did the author actually write the piece? So, right, if you were, looking at letters or a diary, you'd have to look at, or diaries, letters, or autobiographies. I'm really having trouble today. Autobiographies. Like spoonerisms coming out left, right, and center, man. Oh, okay. Autobiographies, right? You're wanting to know, did the author actually write the piece? This can even become a question, right? Sometimes, especially with modern autobiographies, people get like a ghostwriter to write it for them, right? They give them like an outline. You would want to kind of have a sense of that. Credibility, is the report factual? Does it reflect the true feelings of the author? So the factual one is a little bit different, right? Like, is what they're saying a factual representation of what happened at a particular moment in time? Or are they twisting, would someone be twisting history, right? Or twisting what happened to put themselves in a better light, or any of those kinds of things? Does it reflect their true feelings, right? That is a different kind of question, right? How credibly does it reflect the feelings of the author? Or do you have reason to think that they were, pretending for some reason? Does it reflect people of different classes and genders, right? How representative is it of the population at the time? And the meaning, meaning might be somewhat elusive, right? Again, sometimes it's hard to interpret things, especially from the past, accurately. How do you know that your interpretation as someone doing content analysis is the correct one? That is a hard question to answer. Okay. All right. Good? Okay. This stresses me that every time I touch it, it like flickers. All right. So photographs, right? Photographs, they can be used to illustrate points, right? So you can use it as a piece of evidence to support a larger argument. They can be used as sources of data themselves, or prompts to get people talking, right? We talked about this when we talked about visual ethnography. So Scott maintains family photographs are of three types. So, they're idealization, right? Formally posed, right? Or people basically like posturing for a camera. Natural portrayal, candid, not posed, right? So when your parents took that picture of you as playing with Barbies as a little kid, or G.I. Joes or whatever, those were candid photos. Demystification, revealing atypical portrayals, right? Something that is, shows the world as it really is. Maybe, some of the, say, photos coming out of a place like Gaza today, right, might be demystifying, right? Because it might portray the reality of things that are often presented differently in the media. So they could be, revealing something that we don't typically see. Okay. Oh, I was going to say something about this. There's an important question here when it comes to how you use something like a photograph, especially when it when it comes to idealization and this sort of thing. Because often people can actually draw incorrect conclusions about the way the world was in the past. So I'm thinking here of, and I can't remember his name off the top of my head. It's going to come to me. I know he's cited by Neil Postman in his book, The Disappearance of Childhood. But there's this one French author who talked about childhood as basically a modern invention, and something that really doesn't appear until modernity, and that, the modern notion of childhood really made children unhappy. And one of the pieces of evidence that he took, and where he's been criticized for this, is family portraits, right? So in family portraits, children, he said, were always dressed as like miniature adults, right? That they were always looking in like clothes that looked like it was the same clothes that adults wore, but in miniaturized form. And he's like, from this we can conclude that, prior to, 1850, children were treated very differently. They were thought of as miniature adults and not as, children as we think of that. Sorry. I am talking about Philip Aries. Yes, thank you. Philip Aries. That's the name I couldn't bring to mind. Philip Aries had this kind of theory. Now, one of the things that Aries gets criticized for in this view is specifically that, he took this evidence from family portraits, right? He's like, in all of these portraits we have from the 17th century, children are always dressed in like miniatures of kind of adult clothing, not in children's clothing. And people are like, yeah, but Philip, those are posed portraits, right? They're family portraits that are painted, right? So they're this idealized kind of posed, formal pose, right? And so, yes, what do people do when they go get a family portrait? Do they wear the normal clothes they wear every day? No, they wear, special clothes for having their picture taken as a family or for having portraits taken, right? They have themselves painted in kind of nicer clothes. So you have to worry about that a little bit. Like sometimes you can draw potentially incorrect conclusions from the fact that you're looking at, say, a formalized kind of portrait. So you can use a type of visual evidence, but you can wildly misinterpret it because, you're not taking into account, these kinds of distinctions, right? The other one that I would think of for demystification, now that I'm just thinking about it, there's these very famous pictures, I think they were taken by Seymour Hersh, of the My Lai massacre, right? You've probably seen it out of Vietnam, right? There's a little girl, she's naked, kind of running out of a village as the village burns in the background. And this was this kind of moment in the Vietnam War of demystification, because it showed what the US was really doing in Vietnam, right? The way they were bombing villages and displacing people, including children, with I think it was napalm they were using on the village. So this would be a kind of demystification, right? Where you might have a myth, like a social myth of, how, say, a war is being undertaken, and these photographs sort of demystify that at the end of the day. Yeah, please.
It's like showing reality.
Yeah, and especially breaking down a kind of mythos, right? Like if there's like, or it might be like, something like let's talk about the American dream, and then you show a picture of like the broken down factories in Detroit, right? Those could be a kind of demystification as well. Does that all make sense? Okay. I don't know why it does that. Okay. Okay. So, visual objects, sometimes you do have to ask how representative things are, because visual media are extremely susceptible to bias, right? And they say, what did they say? A picture is worth 1,000 words. But a picture is not equivalent to 1,000 words, of course. It's just worth 1,000 words. Particularly, and I think because, people who study visual media will typically say that pictures and video are really powerful because they so closely mirror how we see things, right? How we actually see, with our eyes. How else would you see? Not with your eyes, with your heart. Now I know from Pocahontas that you listen with your heart. Now I'm just confused. sorry, you see, obviously, it mirrors vision, right? So we tend to take often things that we see in visual media as reality because, honestly, it so closely mirrors how you would see things in real life. So, how do you judge the representativeness of photographs? Okay, so obviously photographs available might not be typical of the event or episode or time period that you want to talk about, right? Especially the further you go back in time, the less photography was available. It was more specialized. It was expensive. It was difficult. And so, if you're looking through archival stuff, you're probably going to see, only a certain lens because only certain people were able to afford photography. Obviously, the other thing is that photographers often have their own point of view, right? And something that they're interested in. And so you do have to take that into account, like how representative of what was happening is the visual media that you happen to be looking at. Okay, what's not photographed can be very significant as well, right? Again, because photographers often have a point of view, right, they can introduce a lot of bias, right? And I don't think it's hard to imagine, right, people taking photographs of certain things or videos of certain things and leaving out, right, other things that were happening, in the background, further away, just outside the field of view, and focusing, say on one person, one physical alteration. Fuck my day. Altercation. I just cannot talk today. I'm sorry. I'm having a really hard time. Altercation in an otherwise peaceful kind of protest. All you've missed is me constantly flubbing my words. That's literally the only thing that's happened today. So you're all good. And cursing a little. My apologies. Right, so it is possible, right, that you can focus as a photographer in on something that you want to prove and that you might be leaving out other things that you don't want to show, right? You could have, this would be sort of the Donald Trump argument about January 6th, right? The media focused on the few hundred people that went into the Capitol and the guy with the funny hat and the war makeup, but then ignored the 100,000 people that were outside that never went inside, that were peaceful and didn't do anything, right? I'm not supporting Donald Trump's argument. I'm just giving that as a possible example, right? That you could be like, oh, this was clearly biased because, they took so many pictures of the, what did they call him? The Capitol shaman or whatever, with the Viking hat, or was it a Viking hat or a bullhorns or? Right, yeah, that's what the shaman, right? The Trump shaman or whatever. But then, they didn't take pictures of all the people who were standing around not invading the Capitol. Again, I'm not supporting the Trump argument, but this is the kind of thing that you would want to think about. Did a photographer just focus in on an interesting kind of sub-event, but miss the wider context of something? So selection bias, what is chosen to be photographed, what is chosen to be kept, right? And especially in the digital era, right, we're often generating a massive amount of photographic evidence, but what actually gets kept can be relatively small, right? It's not like we're producing physical media anymore in terms of negatives that might linger around that you could look at later. It's just like, files on a disk somewhere, and they'll probably degrade quickly. I'm taking it that wasn't a question. You were just fixing your hair? Okay, all good. Is it sad that I'm like half hoping this breaks down completely? It's like, oh, it's broken. Can't fix. Good day. Okay. Yeah, no kidding. Smartboards were such a bad investment. Just right in what, like 2000?
Yeah, like, I don't know when you're like third, fourth grade, if you're like graduating 2020, so.
Yeah.
They were the coolest thing ever.
Yep.
And now,
They all broke, and I think the company went bankrupt, so they don't make parts for it anymore.
oh,
Yeah. I think they got taken over by someone else, but I know in like my wife's an elementary school teacher, and they've like been getting rid of them because they suck and you can't get parts for them anymore, so they just break. It was amazing. No.
And everybody wanted to be the person to tell her.
The calibration king or queen. Oh, that's funny. I remember that. My wife hated them because they'd always get out of sync, so she'd be writing and the lines would like show up in a completely different place. Oh, fun times. Okay. Government documents. Government documents are an incredibly rich source of information. And here again, a lot of government documents are actually quantitative because, things like census information, voting records, official reports are a little different, but census information and voting records and things like that are all these big, super deep troves of quantitative data. But governments also produce a lot of qualitative data, things like official reports, interoffice memos, communications. The nice thing about all this government documentation is that it's all FOIPable. FOIP, or Freedom of Information Acts exist at basically federal and provincial and state levels in the US. So government documents are really fun because you can always put in like a FOIP or a FOIA request to get government documents, and you can get some really interesting stuff. However, this also causes agencies that get government funding to play games. Like in particular, like one of the research projects I did was for an agency that gets government funding, but they also have a non-government arm, and they funded my research out of the non-government arm so that nothing that I produced or no communications between us could be subject to FOIP, because they didn't want anyone to find out about it and put in a FOIP request. Even though it was the most anodyne research I could possibly have thought of, they were like, no, we don't want freedom of information requests. I'm like, okay, you're paying me, right? I don't care. Okay. So government documents typically are seen as authentic, right? Because they will have been, in some kind of government archive, and governments are supposed to keep documents essentially forever. And they'll be seen as having, some kind of meaning, typically because they're produced, for a purpose, right? They're purposefully created, and they're done, by official agencies or official persons, right? And this is why, like in the US, right? This is why Donald Trump has gotten into some trouble, because he walked away with official government documents, some of which were classified, others of which were his love letters to Kim Jong-un. I don't know if they were actually love letters, but whatever. I could do a Donald Trump impression right now, but I should probably not. They're just so wonderful, my letters to Kim Jong-un. I want them in my own library. Oh, all I need is a comb over, and what's that? Okay. Oh, okay. So yeah, I mean, generally, right? They're seen as authentic. They have meaning. I'm in such a silly mood today. I'm really sorry. I should just see what. Oh, this is not as bad as my SOS 100 a couple weeks ago, where I started talking about Jordan Peterson, and I started doing my Jordan Peterson voice. Which actually is much more like Kermit the Frog. What's that? It's just that you have to clean your room. I broke Karen. I'm sorry. Oh. Karen, you just have to be serious. Do your work diligently. Okay. My impressions kill, apparently. Literally. Credibility, obviously. Sorry, when it comes to government documents, they can also have a bunch of bias. Because obviously, governments have their own kind of agendas. They have their own reasons for doing things. And so the doc, I'm going to just burst out laughing. Calm yourself, Iago. Okay. So they are going to produce things for a reason. Documents might have bias, right? Often government documents are in support of a particular agenda that a government wants to, promulgate and put forward, because governments, right, have these kinds of reasons that they're doing things. So, sometimes it's useful looking at it, right? What do these biases reveal? Why are they there? You could find probably documents where Justin Trudeau says how much he hates Alberta because Ralph Klein called his dad a mean name one time or something, right? I'm not sure that that's the truth, but whatever, right? And that's why he's trying to destroy Alberta. This is a crazy fever dream that Danielle Smith had, I think. Okay. Okay, official documents from private sources. So, corporate memos, any kind of corporate literature that you can find. Right? Why are you still laughing? Stop it. I can't. Oh. Let's see, this is why eventually I get comments in SOS 100 that are like, it could be a little more serious occasionally. Okay. What's that? I don't know. They're all babies, yeah, university babies. I am extremely silly in that class at times, I must admit. Okay, so corporate documents, right, similar to government documents, right, they are produced by companies or other private organizations. Again, they're likely to be authentic and meaningful if you can get them. They are extremely hard to get. Why? Well, because companies typically want to protect their secrets, right? They don't necessarily want to let people know what happened internally. The only time that you would ever really get a look at them in a lot of cases is, say, like in discovery, if you're doing legal proceedings, but you can't leak that publicly. So they're hard to get, but if you can get them, they tend to be pretty authentic. Yeah, there can be biases, obviously, in terms of what companies want to present. Like things, I guess, when companies present things to the public, even in terms of like publicly facing documents, like financial reports, right? Like, reports for investors. What you might see in a lot of these cases is that they're spinning things for a particular reason, right? That they might distort data to make themselves look as good as possible, or to hide problems that the company is having, or to push their kind of ideological agenda, right? Whatever it happens to be, there are questions about, the credibility, right? Financial reports, all this kind of stuff can be biased. Sometimes you do get, some interesting documents out of companies. Like occasionally people will like leak a board meeting. Someone recorded it and kind of put it. This happened a lot during Zoom. It was super easy to record Zoom. And so I remember like a couple of years ago, maybe somebody leaked like a board meeting out of Disney and it made a big kerfuffle. That's an official social science term, a kerfuffle. Because of some of the things that were being said. So sometimes we get that stuff out of corporate meetings. That one would probably be very credible because people were speaking off the cuff. But then a lot of officially produced corporate documents wouldn't be, right? Because it's like, oh, Disney's, trying to spin how well everything's going, even though they're about to lose like $600 million on the Marvels, or something like that, right? But Disney Plus is going great. It has six subscribers. I haven't been able to get into any of the Marvel shows or the Star Wars shows, so I think it's a big fail for me. I tried with Ahsoka. I just couldn't do it. It was when the space whales showed up, I was done. I was like, nope, I'm out. Okay, representativeness. Yeah, so how representative is any information you get out of companies, right? You have to have access to get it. Sometimes things get leaked, but often, right, someone's putting something out to put a particular spin on things. So you do have to be careful with corporate research or corporate data, because they're often sort of selectively putting things out in the world that they want people to see. But it's not often that you'll get a full picture of what's going on inside private organizations, because they will guard things very closely. For example, this is a past student and made a proposal on their, I think it was on their qualitative portion, that they were going to go and they were going to get a bunch of corporate data from Twitter, right? And they're just going to ask Twitter or Instagram, I can't remember which one it was, to release to them, a researcher, all of their corporate data. And I was like, as an interesting point, that would never happen, right? These companies don't want to release all of their data for lots of reasons. They would release things only that they want you to see, right? Or nothing at all. So corporate data, really, really hard to access. How are we doing for time? 18 minutes. How the time flies. Especially when you can't get through 5 sentences without tripping on your own tongue or doing a Jordan Peterson impression. Okay, so mass media outputs. Mass media outputs are probably the ones that are most commonly done when we talk about content analysis, because they're the most pervasive, they're the easiest to access, right? So, especially in, say, like English film media studies, but even, lots of other places, you would see this kind of content analysis. So yeah, this can be anything: newspaper articles, magazine articles, TVs, films, or whole magazines, right? TV, films, etc. Sometimes, in terms of authenticity, that's nothing important. Authorship can be really hard to ascertain. So in particular, right, like we often say with a film, right, we'll talk about a film as, being from, this is a film that was directed by Michael Bay, for example. And so we treat it as though Michael Bay is the author. But a lot of time, or like a TV show, right? Like it's like a TV show. I'm trying to think if there's one that jumps into my mind that I have a particular showrunner for. Oh, what is The Wire? What's the name of that guy? I can't remember the name of the guy who made it. But we tweet. Almost said a bad word. I'm okay. Yeah. We often treat it as though, say the director of a movie or the producer of a TV show is the author of that thing. But, what's sometimes true is that, often true, it had a different writer, it had a different, cinematographer, and all of these people had input in. So how do you know, and actors, right, who portray things in a certain way, how do you know who the author was? Newspapers have a slightly different problem, right? Sometimes newspaper articles are unattributed, right? Sometimes you do have a byline, but sometimes you have unattributed articles. So you don't know who the voice behind it was. So there's questions of multiple authorship. Especially with visual media, that's pretty complex, right? Even though Steven Spielberg was the director of something, he didn't write the script, he didn't do the cinematography, right? He didn't do the set design, the costumes, or any of that stuff. So it can be hard to know whose voice was represented in what particular moments. Credibility, right? There can be errors, distortions. Uncovering errors or distortions that people make, right? Is there an ideology at play? Are they putting something in, to make a particular point, right? Are they, I don't know. Maybe like a good example of this would be police dramas, right? Police dramas will almost always depict, say, the police as heroic and put upon, and ignore things like questions of, police brutality, problems, corruption within police forces. I'm thinking here of that Nathan Fillion show, The Rookie, that has this very kind of cheery portrayal of the police, right? They almost never do anything wrong except that one. Well, we love watching this show because it's funny, but that one racist cop, the only racist cop on the police force, played by Brandon Routh, who also played Superman. So it was sad to see Superman being racist. But that's a kind of distortion, right? Because it's like every cop is good except that one. He's the bad cop. And once we get rid of him, everything will be wonderful. So uncovering, errors or distortions or ideologies that go into portrayals in text, right, can be part of the work of doing a kind of content analysis, right? And sometimes it's like uncovering, the biases or the hidden ideologies in things. That's what people do, especially like kind of conflict theory or Marxists kind of readings, or really postmodern readings will always be about uncovering or deconstructing the hidden meaning behind things. You see a lot of that. Representativeness. How representative, publications represent particular interest groups and must do so to keep an audience, right? So like when you're looking at, I guess the obvious example would be the news in the US, right? If you're looking at Fox News, you're looking at a particular, it's not representative of the whole world. It's representative of that particular audience. And to understand it, you kind of have to understand that audience, or CNN or MSNBC. We tend to know, or we tend to want to know what the biases are, what audience was being spoken to, and therefore what that might say about how representative it is of, say, the views of a particular group rather than the views of society as a whole. And then context. And here I would say genre. Genre can be really important, right? Because, at least in theory, it would be easy to confuse things that, I guess if you weren't attuned to the context, you could look at something like The Daily Show, right, which is this like fake-ish news broadcast, and somehow treat it as hard news rather than what it is, which is satire most of the time. Although in the last few years, it got just really preachy most of the time. It wasn't really watchable. Anyway, that's my commentary on The Daily Show. Not anything important. But, you want to distinguish between, say, something that's hard news, that's, entertainment, that's humor, that's satire. All of these things are going to matter in terms of what you're watching and what the kind of meaning is. Alrighty. Okay, virtual output. I don't know how to put this kindly. Virtual output is really, 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 really difficult. Principally because the online space is such a dumpster fire when it comes to all sorts of questions of authorship and that stuff. So, anything like virtual websites, emails, listservs, discussion groups, chat rooms, websites especially, and even news websites, it is so easy to set up a website, right? Or a Twitter page, or just about anything, right? And claim that you're putting out something authentic when it's really twisted. I've been really interested, like the last few years, there's this really interesting sort of phenomenon where in the Ukraine-Russia war, both the Ukrainians and the Russians have created these massive outputs of information on Twitter, right? Just tons of it. I subscribe to all of it. And it's honestly like, the authenticity question there is really, really difficult to ascertain, because some of them present themselves as just like these commentators, right? I'm just commenting on things that I see. And it's like, yeah, okay, clearly you're a Russian shill or a Ukrainian shill, right? Because you're presenting things only from one particular side. And right, it's always interesting because it's like, as one side or the other is being routed, they're like, no, everything is fine. We are winning. It's great. Nothing happened. All those videos you saw of us getting our asses handed to us, it's not ever us, it's like the Russians, that clearly didn't happen. That's fake. Anyway, authenticity in online spaces is so hard to determine. And I mean, like, I've sort of immersed myself in this for the last couple of years. And like, at this point, I can barely tell truth from fiction anymore, because I'm like, which sources do I trust and which don't I trust? I can't even tell anymore. Because, sources that I thought were trustworthy turned out to be full of something. I just remember this, especially in the early days of the war. There's this thing about the Ghost of Kiev, this fighter pilot from Ukraine that supposedly shot down like 10 Russian fighters. And it was like, after a while, it's like, oh, actually, all the videos were produced in a video game called DCS. And it was super fun. And people were like, the Ghost of Kiev is kicking Russian ass. And it was like, yeah, that doesn't look real. Like, what? But anyway. And then people were like, actually, this footage is from a video game, you morons, right? So authenticity is a huge problem. And like figuring out what's real, what's fake. Like I could set up a Twitter page tomorrow and start commenting on the Russia-Ukraine war. And, that stuff would be there. Would I have anything interesting to say about it? Or would I be a reliable source? Probably not. And it's so difficult to figure out authenticity because, right, you can get a propaganda website set up by a government to support its particular cause. that completely makes everything impossible to understand. The credibility, it's entirely possible that the posted information is a bunch of garbage. It might not be credible at all. All right, maybe we'll do, how are we doing for time? 8 minutes. Okay, representativeness. Yeah, the post, how representative is anything online? It's hard to tell, right? It's constantly changing. Search engines, although basically, is there search engines? There's Google and what's that other one? Ting, the one no one uses. I know it's Bing. I'm being silly. What's that? Is that still a thing? Has anyone used Yahoo as a search engine in the last 15 years? Yahoo? You weren't even aware it existed. It used to be the biggest search engine in the world. I don't know. I use Yandex. No, I'm kidding. It's a Russian search engine. I just put everything into ChatGPT now and see what happens. Including all of your answers on exams to make... No, I'm kidding. Anyway, I've lost all of you. I'm being silly. Okay, let me get through these two things and I'll stop. Because you're not taking your job seriously. Okay. So representativeness in terms of online. How representative is any given source? If you don't know where it came from, it's hard to say, right? Search engines can be biased, and there's been lots of work done on how biased different search systems are. My battery is running low. I must finish. I clearly didn't plug in my laptop last night. Either that or my son's been playing Rocket League on it and he never recharges it. One or the other. Websites have biases, especially when you don't know the sources or the authenticity, and there's a lot of ideological sources online. It's hard to know, right? Hard to know the bias without doing a lot of digging. What's the context of the website? Why is it created? Why is it there? Is there a web speak or language barrier, right? This is, I think, a little bit more common in the early days of the internet where they had a particular lingo. All right, let's stop there because the next thing, I can't even go forward, is semiotics. But we're not going to talk about semiotics today. Instead, we will do that after reading week. What's that? In what class? Is that lit theory? Or?
It's racism and decolonization.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in that context, it's very, very confusing.
Did you have to read Ferdinand de Saussure or anything like?
Probably, but I didn't.
You did.